All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the unconditioned love aspect of the absolute. And again, as I frame it, the concept I'm presenting for the absolute is that there's an unmanifest functioning, which is characterized by absence, what we traditionally call emptiness. Also, deep peacefulness and profound stillness are a part of the unmanifest. And the manifest is really the flip side. The unmanifest is generally a rich blackness, a deep, unending blackness, and the manifest is the bright white, that really super bright white appearance, and the characteristic is presence. So we have absence in one, a nothingness, a vast nothingness, but it's a nothingness with a something to it. So it's not nothing. It's nothing with a kind of something to it. And then the presence is the flip side in the functioning, the manifest functioning. And that's really a here-ness, a now-ness, an immediacy. But it's that aliveness, that beingness of the presence that's so palpable. And people can have, I've mentioned before, can have realizations or openings to the presence itself alone or with other features of the absolute. If you had just an experience of the presence, again, that wouldn't be an awakening, but it would be, it could be either a unity experience or it could be a deep presence experience. So that does happen for folks. But the unconditioned love, it's important to really understand that the absolute is objective. I've said before, when I was young, I went to Christian school, and I had this picture in my mind when I was quite young of God being, they had some pictures, and he was an old white man with long white hair and long white beard. And I envisioned him having this accounting ledger and writing down every bad thing I did or thought or said. And that at the end of my life, they would look at the tally for my life of good and bad, and then it would be decided what the afterlife would be. And it isn't like that. That's a human projection onto the absolute. The absolute is profoundly objective. It creates all life, but once the life is created, it knows, the life is conditioned. It's dependent upon the right conditions to be born. And once it's born, not only is it growing, but it's also beginning to decay. And at some point, that life, that conditioned life, ends. But the quality of the absolute doesn't. It's really like people who are steeped in physics will talk about energy. Energy never ends, it just changes to a different energy. And if you hold that, that's really a great way to conceptually hold the functioning of the absolute, that it's just a changing of energy from this manifestation to that manifestation, and even to the unmanifest. So even to nothing. That's where everything, that's like the canvas that life is painted on, is the nothingness, the absence. But the loving presence, the unconditioned love, is really important to touch into and open to, because as ordinary humans, we view love as being conditioned. There are times when our partner or family member, we can love them, feel their love. Other times, maybe not. Maybe we're angry at them, we've had a disagreement, or we've had a break in a relationship. So we're not feeling the love quite in the same way. It's conditioned upon the relationship and all the different qualities of humans. And so it's important to contact this unconditioned love and open to it, because number one, it pushes against the belief that whatever part of us that we feel is broken, is unlovable, is bad, we hold those convictions very deeply. And one of the ways that we begin to challenge those beliefs about ourselves and the world is by contact with this love. This is why I stress the Brahma Viharas, the heart practices, so much, because they're terribly important for us to get. There's an unconditioned quality of heart we can open to, and we don't need to earn it, and we can't lose it, is really important. And then it begins to challenge that conviction. I'm broken. And I've said before that in my framing, the psychological map that I find to be the most on point is the dual unity, where the baby is born in a dual unity, in an undivided experience of presence. And the baby doesn't differentiate. It doesn't know it's not a part of the whole. It doesn't know the caregiver is a separate being. It sees all of this from the oneness perspective of presence. And over time, with getting in touch with, I'm hungry, food comes from out there, from that caregiver, then that begins to separate, create a separation, a division, individuation starts. But for most infants, when they turn away from presence, that gets replaced by a story that somehow I was defective and presence rejected me. And so that begins that core wound. And then later the personality is structured on that, typically to distract anyone and ourselves from touching into that core wound. That I'm unlovable, I'm broken, I'm valueless, I'm worthless, I'm defective in some fashion. And as I mentioned in Demystifying Awakening, that issue of the core wound is one that can only be resolved after a lot of personal work after awakening, a lot of personality work by observing our life and our behavior and really unpacking, uprooting whatever's incongruent with the realization, with the awakening. And there comes a time when it's possible to work the core wound directly. But we have to follow all of these streams back to the main river and follow the river back to the source. And then we can work it. But we can't go to the source directly. We've got to go follow all the tributaries and work all of those. In effect, purify the stream, purify the river, and then come back to the source. So that's sort of the putting it together. But the love is just tremendously important. And this is why, again, why I stress it and why I think it's so critical. And in my early days in the Zen tradition, I think a lot of the teachers had a lot of no-self, emptiness experiences, but a number had not had any of the love or unity experiences. So there was a lot of brutality that happened because everything was empty to these teachers. Everything was in the nothingness. So their actions didn't matter, was their perspective. Rather than from the love perspective and the non-dual vision of that is that literally you are me. So if I'm harming you, it's the same as harming myself. And not in a personal way, but in a universal way. So we're all connected, we're all part of the expression of the absolute. So literally harming you is the same as harming me. And that's where our motivation changes in the world. We start attending to others as we do ourselves. So I've got one last point I want to make before we do a little more meditation. There was a Zen teacher in Japan, I'm not sure when, maybe 1,000 years ago or so, named Banki. And his teaching was on the unborn, is what he called it. And he clearly was a realized teacher, but his emphasis was that nothing mattered. He had a temple and students, but he told the students, it doesn't matter if you meditate, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how you treat people, because everything is part of, in effect, the unconditioned. And he wasn't inaccurate in his perspective, but it wasn't enough to simply say to somebody, to pull somebody off the street who doesn't have any kind of spiritual practice, and to say to them, oh, the absolute is unconditioned, so nothing you do matters. That doesn't make any sense. There's nothing they can do with that. It's not a reality for them. It's just another concept. And so, predictably, Banki's lineage didn't survive because they didn't have practices to support the process of the unwinding of the self and the deepening of contact with the absolute. He was simply teaching the absolute. This is here right now. But again, it's not enough. For people to get a kind of a contact high is useful, but they have to have that experience on their own. It has to be their realization. That's the only way we can, we wake up out of the conceptual convictions that we have about I'm permanent, I'm real, this is me. All of that gets shaken through that.